Hey everyone, welcome to episode 17 of Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete. We're joined today by Chris Hoard and also Pete, my good friend and partner in crime. Pete, Chris, how are you guys?
Chris, you first?
Yeah.
You're both too polite.
I'm trying to do the gentlemanly thing there. No, I'm really good, guys. It was such a pleasure to finally get here on the show. So thank you ever so much for having me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Awesome. It's so good of you to join us. Thank you for spending the time with us today, Chris. So yes, I am Pete, as Rue says, and welcome to episode 17. And Chris Hoard, Microsoft MVP, Microsoft Certified Trainer, Regional Director for MCT, I believe, as well. Am I right with that? Yep, and one of the founders of Teams Nation and many other things. So welcome, Chris. We're delighted to have you with us today. Would you mind just giving a quick introduction to yourself and who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So my kind of current role at this moment is a partner education lead for a company called Vusion here in the UK. Vusion are a tier 2 CSP, so otherwise known as a disti, a distributor. So we support a lot of Microsoft partners, and underneath that, the partners support their customers. So it's kind of almost, I guess, at the top of a pyramid. And the distributor provides services such as Microsoft 365 and Azure, as well as a kind of a value-added layer. So it's things like professional services and marketing. The part that I actually run within the group that I work for is education. So my kind of role currently this current time is to create programs for partners and their customers in order to be able to learn, to get certified and skilled up. And yeah, I've been doing that, I guess, for about 2 years now. I've been a Microsoft certified trainer for, I think it's 4 years. And before that, I used to head up professional services for the group. So whereas kind of a lot of my career was getting hands-on, doing the migrations and customizations to things like Office 365, for the last part, I've almost kind of come away from, I've kind of pivoted into the education side of it. So they've put me out to pasture a little bit, and being off the front line. Before I was actually in IT, I was a secondary school teacher. So I used to teach geography. So I come from a non-IT background. So it's been quite the journey. And so the last couple of years, it's really gone full circle.
Cool. How jumping from geography teacher to worldwide renowned Teams expert, that's not a typical career path. So how did that pivot start to happen for you?
Do you know what? I mean, I didn't know what I kind of wanted to do coming out of teaching. So I was a secondary school teacher. I used to teach kind of children between the ages of 11 and 18. And the reason why I kind of came away from that was very much due to the politics of the time and the fact that I went in with a kind of different expectations. I thought that it would be a lot more creative, and whereas the national curriculum, you have to almost follow a kind of set program where there's very kind of little ability to maneuver within that. So I came out of teaching and I was between work for some time, and I actually went to a recruitment agency, and they said, oh, there's this position that's for 2 weeks. Would you like to go there, kind of temporary, just to fill in the gap? And I thought, yeah, I needed some money. So that 2 weeks has ultimately turned into pretty much 14 years within the IT industry. So yeah, it wasn't even planned. I had no kind of intention to go into IT. For me, it was something more of a hobby as to something that I would think professionally. So it's something that I guess, like maybe many people that you've heard, you kind of drift in and then it becomes your career. So I've been incredibly lucky along that time.
Awesome. That's really cool. It's like, you're right, as far as most of us do kind of start out with a hobby and it's like, well, I'm kind of good with computers, so maybe I'll do this. And before you know it, you can't get out of it. It's kind of
Absolutely. Absolutely, I'm definitely an IT lifer. I can't see myself doing anything else for the rest of my career. A lot of people would probably turn around and say, "Well, hey, I harbor this secret dream to do something else, like be a writer or be a musician." No, that's not it for me. I've kind of accepted my lot. So hopefully, at least another kind of 20, 30 years in this field, it would be awesome.
That's awesome.
So, working in education as you do, Chris, in Microsoft 365 and Teams in particular, what would you say are the main differences between M365 from a commercial standpoint and an education standpoint?
Well, the education SKUs, they're very similar. I mean, Microsoft at Inspire, because I've been doing Inspire all week, and one of the things that they've been pushing with Microsoft 365 is this idea of factoring in industry, and they came out with all of the industry SKUs. Well, education in the same way is very similar to that. So it's making sure that the services that they do in Microsoft 365 are more tailored to the education environment rather than to the business. And the features of all the applications within Microsoft 365 reflect that. So an example of that in Microsoft Teams would be, for example, the ability to be able to set assignments. Now that isn't in the commercial packages at all, because it's not really necessary in that context. So having IT services that are kind of designed for education, that are designed for teachers and students, makes an absolute lot of sense. And it's one of those reasons why I think Microsoft have been successful in that area, because there are need for applications in the education environment that are just kind of, they're not used in other verticals.
I guess one of the other, because obviously, COVID threw a whole bunch of resource at teams and things like that, because we're also seeing things like breakout rooms now, which to me, when I looked at that originally, I thought, oh, well, that's for schools and things like that, because my wife does a lot of teaching, so they had it in Zoom, so we wanted to get that feature parity. But we are starting to see some of that also getting used in the business world as well, and it also empowers, you can have like kind of online conferences and things like that where you have your breakout rooms, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of the features that you've seen in the past year for Teams meetings have actually been driven by it through the education side of the group. If you talk to the product group, it's come out of education. So the ability to have breakout rooms, the ability to have custom backgrounds, the ability to be able to hard mute. All of those kind of features have been driven from education, because when the pandemic first occurred and people started to teach remotely, then the feedback Microsoft were getting at the time was quite negative, because students within the classes, you've still got that behavioral element that the teachers would have to accommodate for, and you didn't have the controls within Microsoft Teams meetings. So what I would say is that education is a really a big driver that, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, they had problems with Zoom in the States with the K-12 education system that was fed back to Microsoft in terms of security and functionality, where a lot of the schools turned around and said, we would love to be on Microsoft's platform, but you didn't have functionality X, Y, and Z in your meetings. So again, that was another push for Microsoft to kind of bring in these functionalities. So education's a real driver for the rest of the ecosystem for all the new types of functionality that we're seeing today.
And Microsoft, as we know, never standing still. You only have to look at Inspire this week to see all of the great announcements. What are your key takeaways from the last couple of days of Inspire this week, Chris?
Oh, wow. There's I must have consumed about 20 hours of video in the space of the last kind of 30, right? And I think that the big announcement, I think that the general consensus is on Windows 365 and the streaming of the Windows experience that's built on top of the Azure Virtual Desktop platform. The whole idea that kind of almost like they're taking devices essentially out of the equation for IT administrators, so you can just stream Windows 365 and not really worry too much about what device the end user is ultimately using. But the thing I love about it most of all is that you now have 3 different models within that. You have Windows 11, you have Azure Virtual Desktop for the more kind of customized requirements, and then you've got the in between, which is Windows 365. So they're really kind of accommodating to all those scenarios that we talk about. In addition, I think another big thing was Microsoft Viva. So we finally kind of understood the Viva pricing model and the plans for API integration and new partners coming on board. I think that there's a lot of excitement about Glint being integrated into the Microsoft Viva ecosystem, and I'm sure over time we're going to see a ton of partners want to get on board with that, because the opportunity for the employee experience is just so large. The other thing that I kind of really stood out for me was the fact that they really want people to be building apps, and that, you know, through, I guess, 2 points that really jumped out. Number one was Power Platform and the fact that it's gone up to 16 million monthly active users. So that's the first time, as far as I'm aware, that they've disclosed an actual number. So that's a kind of almost just over. Teams is what, 145 million, probably over 150 million at this point. So 10% of that is Power Platform. If we think about Office 365 users being at 300 million, then Power Platform's about a 20th of the size of that. So there's a huge opportunity for people to get into low code, no code. But at the same time, it's they are reducing the transaction fees within Microsoft Teams. So they're really trying to encourage ISVs to build more apps. Now, we've seen apps in Microsoft Teams kind of jump up over the last 12 months. 12 months ago, it was probably 500-600. Their quote at Inspire was 800. If you look in the Teams Admin Center, it's over 1,000. So there's a lot more app integration to come within Microsoft Teams, a lot more kind of services that are coming, a lot of opportunities for customers and partners to begin to work together with the ISVs in new programs to be able to push that out. So yeah, really, I think interesting for all.
Yeah, you can see that whole push, kind of the whole, it reminds me of the Balmer thing, developers, but even with the Windows store now, or I guess what would be the store for business, which is slightly different, ultimately the same back end. Obviously, that's changing now as well, insofar as you're not limited to these modern Metro style apps. You can upload any app to the Windows store, and they're, again, you mentioned them cutting the transaction fees for Teams. They've slashed the cut that Microsoft will take from the Windows store as well now, I believe. Used to be something like 20%, now it's down to single digits. Single digits. So you do start to see this kind of focus around Microsoft really just kind of, you know, let's lower the cost of entry for folks so that we get more folks in. That seems to me to be their approach that they're taking. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I mean, if we think about kind of the growth of Microsoft Teams, for example, with Microsoft Teams, pre-pandemic, that was July 2019, it was 13 million DAU. November, so when the kind of first news was coming out from China that something may be up, that was 20 million DAU. And today we're, of course, 145 million DAU. But they're always thinking about, you know, how are we going to get to the next kind of 100 million people on board? You know, how are we going to make sure that every kind of seat that's using Office 365 is using Microsoft Teams? Because at the moment that only stands at roughly 50%. So they're trying to encourage this all the time, and the story has kind of always been there the last couple of this year as Teams as a platform, but it's really coming out, and that, for example, that works pretty well with the narrative of Viva, with Viva and the modules being built on the Teams platform as well. So we're seeing over the last years that the Teams, if we think about Teams' life cycle, Teams is 4 years old now. When it first came out, it was all about unified communications and the ability to be able to collaborate and communicate with users. Over time, that's kind of shifted more towards Teams as a platform. And, you know, the kind of the key, I think, for Microsoft into growing that even further is the ability to have this really rich ecosystem of applications, whether that's applications that are based, that are kind of full code applications that are based in Azure, or low code, no code applications. They just want a lot of people to kind of come on board into the ecosystem for sure.
How is it that Satya described it again in his keynote, his closing keynote? Wasn't it? It's sovereignty for developers and agency for consumers. Was that right? Something like that. And I love that quote. It seemed almost quite Apple-esque.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, they explicitly called it out and inspire. They, you know, and I think that the fountainhead to drive this is what they call collaborative apps. So it's apps that are built specifically upon the collaborative platform. So they were kind of prior to that time, before Teams, if you can imagine it, like you would have applications that you can kind of just kind of consume standalone. A good example today would be using a Power App, for example, through a web browser, kind of on its own, kind of in isolation. But collaborative apps are specifically designed to be kind of based upon teams and to be able to collaborate together. So basically their kind of idea is that with Teams development and Teams as a platform, we're seeing this whole generation of applications that are built specifically on collaboration scenarios, and that's what Microsoft are doing themselves. So if we can think of Microsoft Lists as a good example, when it came out in GA last year, and Microsoft, or should I say, when it came out or was announced at Microsoft Build, it went GA at the beginning of this year. It was specifically designed to be worked into Teams. It wasn't an application which was just a web experience. It was based upon Teams. Yammer is something that's been kind of changed to be able to function upon Microsoft Teams. So there are all of these kind of great examples that when Microsoft develops an app, they kind of design it to be used within Microsoft Teams for collaborative purposes, and that's their definition of a collaborative app.
Like the other thing we're starting to see now, because I think I got a message through about this in the message center recently, is we're starting to see this fluid framework come through, where my understanding of that, and I haven't dealt with it in any great detail, but it really just kind of makes that collaboration a little more seamless across multiple platforms with everyone at the same time. An example I think I seen was where you kind of have this embedded frame within a Teams message or something like that, and it's a to-do list. And as I'm editing that to-do list on my mobile device, that's updating in almost real time for folks on the desktop. So I guess that kind of is that the kind of is that the logical end of this whole collaboration experience, where it's just making sure no matter what device you're on, what platform you're on, or where you are, you're being able to communicate and work with folk at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's all designed from the idea is they are trying to bring it to the user, as opposed to the user having to go off and do kind of have all different applications and experiences. I mean, if you're an end user, if we think about kind of, we go back kind of 7-8 years ago when Office 365 was just released. But if we go back even, in fact, let's go back before that. All the applications that we used were kind of all disparate and siloed and disconnected between each other. We think about all the different identities that we were using for all of those different applications. It was intrinsically difficult for the user, and the experience was always disjointed. We'd always be pinballing around on our machines, and we would have to remember, 40 different logins to all of these applications and stuff like that. And over time, Microsoft have been pulling everything together in order to basically serve it up to where the user actually is. And the concept isn't new. I mean, if you go back even before Microsoft Teams, there were businesses that were doing this beforehand, and not just Slack, right? So I think it was called Workplace for 365 or Workday for 365. It was something whereby you could bring everything together through a web browsing experience. I remember seeing it because I was actually there with the ISV in Canary Wharf in London at the time, because we used to have an office up there, and I remember actually going to it and thinking, this is really cool, because it's the concept that they're bringing everything to the user, so you don't kind of step out of your flow of work, and that is what Microsoft Teams is ultimately today. So whether that kind of bringing those apps with Fluid Framework is very much like having a toolbox of of objects that you can use out of the box to very easily kind of create that within the flow of work. So if we think of a list, for example, or a table, a pre-populated table, we can automatically bring that into chats and conversations. They announced that, I think it was 2 years ago, build, it really only taken off at this point. So we're going to see, you know, a lot of it over the course of, and I'm sure in the MVP community, there are loads that they're going to be on top of this fiscal.
That's a nice segue into community, actually. Let's talk a little bit about that. So you are a prolific community contributor. You're now a 2-time Microsoft MVP. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the winner of the Commsverse Community Personality of the Year award. Is that the right award? Have I got that right?
Yeah, do you know what's really funny? When I won that award, you know, I said to my wife, "Oh look, I've won this Personality of the Year award," and the first thing she said is "What personality?"
Oh,
that is cool. Yeah, that's like something my wife would say. Yeah, always keeping my feet on the ground. But MVP, I really love the community. I kind of started in quite a clandestine way. I remember one evening going onto the tech community, and then looking through to get an answer for a question. I saw another one. I thought, you know what, I'm going to answer that question. And it's amazing when you can kind of almost bring it back to things like that, because I ended up getting hooked in the Microsoft tech community, a bit like yourself, Peter. Yeah. You get to meet people through that community. So I met Adam Deltinger and Chris Webb and Vesa Nopanen, you know, guys that are my friends today. We talk every day, but through that you end up becoming aware of all the community activities. So things like Ask the Experts, the AMAs, start speaking at events, doing blogs, you know, you name it. A lot of it kind of, it just kind of aggregated after a period of time. And when you're doing this stuff, I think somebody asked, you know, at the time, they're like, "Oh, have you considered it? You know, are you an MVP or something?" I'm like, "No, I wasn't an MVP. I'd not considered it up to that point." And it's only when I drew that attention kind of to it, I thought, you know, yeah, why not? Let's see about this. And, you know, because if you're doing all that stuff anyway, I mean, it's an award, right? It's not like a certification. It's just recognition for, you know, what it is that you do for the community. But community for me over the last couple of years, it's reinvigorated my world in IT. Before I was in the community, I reached a point in my career where, you know, when you do corporate work, kind of just corporate work, sometimes it can get a little bit soulless. In terms of, you know, everything's quite transactional, everything's very business-like. You know, I headed up professional services, so everything I did was based upon money and the like. And so the community has added a kind of richness and a passion. You know, when you're around all the people that are so passionate about this all the time, they're the kind of people that actually sustain you doing this type of thing. And it becomes more than just about IT. So, you know, Adam, Vesku, Chris, you know, and the guys, all the extended network, Amanda Sterner, Carolina Ketakari, Chirag Patel, you know, you guys probably know, you know, lots of people who I know in the community. Having that network and that group of friendships and stuff really gives what for me was the kind of the missing part of my career. It was the gap that I couldn't fill through corporate work. And so doing corporate and community is kind of like a nice balance now. So yeah, it's worked out really well.
Yeah, love that. It is really special when you start meeting these folks and you find out that you're not the only one obsessed with all this kind of stuff. And we were just talking about it at the weekend, actually, how Pete mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you mentioned that you were going to try and take a little bit of time off. And then a few hours later, you messaged me saying, I was going to take some time off, but I've just spent it all on the tech community, helping folks out. But it becomes addictive, you know, when you engage with these kinds of things.
Yeah. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because it becomes a hobby. You know, some people ask me, they're very much like, you know, what hobbies have you got outside of work? And I say, oh, I've got IT. And I really have kind of reached the stage. I mean, my friendships and stuff is with a lot of people in IT. It is a real community, you know, and you can't, a lot of the community successes, they're just things that you can't do by yourself. I mean, Teams Nation's a good example. All of that would never be possible unless, you know, people like yourselves and the community were actually involved in order to be able to execute that. But what's really cool as well is just having people to be able to share your passions with, you know, things that you're really interested in. If I talk to friends outside of IT, and, you know, let's just take an example, I'll be like, oh, I'm so pumped about this new security ad in Microsoft 365. They'd already been looking past me, and their eyes are glazed over, right? And so having people that can share that excitement and share that passion, for sure, it's it's just a real validating kind of experience, and you realise, like you say, you're not alone.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned Teams Nation there, so it'd be good to kind of get into this a little bit, because it's something that you obviously, I mean, I don't know how you get the time for it, but you clearly put a lot of time into that with the rest of the team. What was the kind of genesis of Teams Nation, and can you just tell folks a little bit about it?
Yeah, Teams Nation, it began as the European Teams user group, and it was originally called Oktoberfest. So when I met Adam Deltinger in the tech community, we started kind of, it'd be good to kind of do something else other than the tech community, you know, maybe talk a little bit. We saw other people were doing it, so let's kind of set up. And I remember having the kind of conversation with Adam in terms of setting up the user group, the European Teams user group. And we set that up and we started doing it on a monthly basis. I think it was January 2019. And a couple of months after, we thought, you know what, let's go and try and do a conference, a small conference. And I kind of really remember this moment because I was on my phone and we were talking. I think it was on WhatsApp, or, you know, I was standing in my kitchen, and we agreed that we would do this kind of Oktoberfest. And it was funny because at the time we weren't known in the community. Nobody really knew us, so we had to literally beg people in order to kind of turn up, because they'd never heard of us. They didn't know us. You know, it would be a risk for them, I guess, to put their names against something which was an unknown kind of event. And we ran that in October 2019, and we had 30 kind of speakers. And what's really cool is that most of the people that spoke in that were either MVPs or went on to become MVPs at the time. We had pretty much the whole of the organizing team from Teams Dagen in Sweden. So Amanda Sterner spoke at it, Linus Cansby spoke at it, Martin Helbro spoke at it. We had the Comsverse organizing team that spoke at that event. So we had Mark Vale and Randy Chapman. But we literally had to, like I say, it was so clandestine as well how we set it up. We knew nothing about it. We knew nothing how to organize events. It was just kind of trying to reach out to people through Twitter and be like, oh, can you turn up on this date and speak? And then, even though it was called Oktoberfest, it wasn't actually in the Oktoberfest period. We had a lot of feedback to say, oh, Oktoberfest finished at the end of September, so going on with that. We brought Vesku Opening on board, and we changed it. We changed it the name to Teams Fest, and so we did a couple of them as Teams Fest, and they just ended up kind of getting bigger and bigger and accumulating it. So it's like, what can we do next? Well, we kind of like the idea of doing this track, and we kind of want to make it a little bit longer than last time. So the Teams Nation that we just did was the biggest one. We had over 115 sessions, I think, so 117, I think, maybe. We had a mix of Microsoft speakers, MVP, and of course new people that new speakers. We try to diversify this year in terms of having French and German tracks. So we worked with Patrick Guillemenet and the AMS team for the French track, and Raphael Kolner and the Teams Community Day Online to do the German track. We had a great moderation team. The moderation team is really the ones that power the event, and they're the ones that kind of manage all of the tracks. We had some unbelievable speakers. I mean, you guys, you know, were there amongst others, and hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll look to come back again in 2022. And we've already booked a date 6th of April because there was a funny story. It was originally going to be on May the 26th, and then Microsoft, we found out, came along and put Microsoft Build on those 3 days. So I had to go and renegotiate with like 150 speakers for the new day. And this was at the end of March. So we only had 7 weeks between that and the event. So by the time we got to the event, Vesku and I were basically finished. We were just like, because I'm doing it on top of work is quite crazy. But we're just so thankful for the community support. Like, a lot of people in Teams Nation have spoke at all of the events and kind of come along with us to the journey. So we hope to see them again next year for another time.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from a speaker perspective, I'm kind of new to the whole shebang, but it was an absolute breeze, I guess I'd say. Even just from Teams itself, the way we were able to just join these Teams meetings and present to a whole bunch of folks, it was a real pleasure to be part of. So thank you for putting it together.
That's no worries. I mean, one of the things that's most important to us is the experience for both the people, the users that are coming along, so the attendees, but also the speakers as well, because we ourselves are, all of us, so Vesku, Adam, Chris, myself, and all the moderators, we all kind of speak quite regularly on the circuit and have taken those experiences to kind of funnel them in. We just want to make it easy for people. We find that sometimes that things can be kind of overcomplicated or a bit disjointed. I see Peter smiling because I think, Peter, you've experienced it too. So we just want to make it an easy experience. If a speaker's going to come and they've spent time creating that content, we don't want them to have any issues at all. We want them to be able to focus on their content and a great delivery, and everything else we'll try to take care of it. So hopefully next time that'll always be a principle, look after the attendees and the speakers, because they're to the day is full, really.
And thank goodness that was all in place for you, Roo, because you had a little incident before your talk, didn't you? You lost your voice seconds before, but you coped really well with it.
Yes, so I can't remember when my session was, but it was very early. I want to say it was about 9 a.m. And I think I followed you because you were at 8 a.m. And it gets to about, 8:57, and my voice just goes and really struggle to talk. And then luckily I was able to just kind of work through it, but it was probably nervousness or something, because it's never happened before. It's never happened again. But yeah, it was a good experience. Really recommend folks check it out when it comes around next year, or they can go to YouTube and check out all of this year's presentations as well, because a lot of that stuff is Teams moves at a hell of a pace, but that stuff's still relevant. There's a lot of really good stuff in there.
Yeah, we're really looking excited kind of for the next year, because I think for the last kind of year we've done it every 6 months, and we wanted to be kind of responsible in terms of the amount of events. When we tried reorganizing the last one after Microsoft announced Build, it was really problematic for us because there's so many other events, and we know how much work goes into creating an event. So you don't want to kind of take that away from other events at the time. That was another reason why we said 6th of April for next year as well. It's out of the way of Microsoft events, but also as well that all the other people that organize events, so that Comsverse, South Coast Summit, all the other, Modern Workplace Paris, we wanted to send it out to everyone that's what it is, so that it's kind of fair on them to know that we're not going to put stuff too close together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, one of the big patterns that's starting to emerge with a lot of these conferences is either going back to in-person, or hybrid is quite a popular one. Now, Teams Nation is obviously focused all around Teams. Do you think that's anything that will happen to that event, or do you see it as being an online-only event?
No, it's going to be an online-only event. As organisers, Vesku is from Finland, Adam is from Sweden, Chris is from Texas in the US, and the moderators, again, are from all other countries. I mean, we had Garana. I think Garana's from Serbia, and Thomas from Germany. So we're from all parts, really. I can completely understand the kind of the value of going back to in-person events, to be able to see people, to be able to catch up, to be able to have a beer with them and have some fun, and have that kind of in-person connection. But for us, we're all kind of products, really. I mean, if you think about the time that we came into MVP, so Vesku, myself, Adam, a lot of our successes has been on the virtual, because we weren't around really at a time when all the in-person events was happening.
Yeah.
I think the last in-person event that I actually went to that was community-based was SharePoint Saturday in London, and that was in 2019. So a lot of our success has been virtual, but also as well, it's kind of a principle of the group. So one of the principles of why we do it is to try and democratize, kind of that information. And it's specifically for people that economically may not be able to travel to the actual event themselves. So we want to make that kind of available to everyone. Some people have suggested hybrids that you kind of get a kind of mix of both. But I think that if you let's take kind of Comsverse, because Comsverse is coming up, and that's kind of one of the first hybrid events that's coming in the UK. Those guys, have taken on a lot of risk in terms of kind of finances in order for that event. And that event has been kind of, they've had to navigate the pandemic with that. So the virtualization, we've got the tools to be able to spin this up relatively easy. That's why a lot of people are kind of doing those events. We would, of course, never say never, because you never know how it's going to be, but we don't kind of see that, in the next couple of years. So for us, it'll probably remain virtual for the whole course.
And I don't see anything wrong with that at all. I think it's good to have that choice as well. I mean, like you, I mean, the time that I got into the community and became an MVP, I've never spoken in person. I've been to in-person events. I've been to Ignite the Tour and Future Decoded and all that, but I've never spoken on an actual stage in front of an actual audience. So that will be a new experience if that ever happens for me. But and everyone's different. I mean, I quite like this. I'm like many people who work in this industry, I'm quite introverted, so I'm quite comfortable doing things remotely and behind the camera. But everyone's different, and it'll be interesting to see how events go as a whole, won't it? For sure. So we can only watch this space and see how it develops.
Absolutely, and we applaud all the people like Comsverse and South Coast Summit and the like that want to do hybrid events or want to go back to do kind of in-person events. I really hope that kind of after this point, so like next year, the year after, hopefully that'll balance out slightly, so people then, you say, can have the choice. They can get out and go to these events, or they can just do the online ones, and then hopefully that will give them more choice of kind of moving forward, because there is kind of antipathy towards kind of virtual events that has grown. So we had, I think it was 5,000 registrations for Teams Nation. It was a crazy amount who registered, but how many turned up? It was like half of that. So it was about 2,500 that actually turned up on the day, because when you're running these virtual events and they're free, people will, because they've not paid, as it were, and they don't have to go anywhere. It's very easy to kind of just ignore them, not turn up. I've registered, but I don't really have to go. There's no pressure on me. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it will balance out so that people can get a kind of best of both worlds moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about the MCT program, the Microsoft Certified Trainer program. And you, Chris, are obviously an MCT and a regional director for that program. Rue and I are also MCTs. And one of the things, I've got potentially a bit of a controversial opinion about this, which we'll see what you think about. When I looked at becoming an MCT, I was quite surprised at how easy it was to get. The only thing I had to do was fill in a form and get a reference from another MCT. And the fact that I was qualified to a certain level with Microsoft certifications, namely the Enterprise Administrator Expert certification, that was enough. Next day, I was an MCT, and I was actually a little disappointed. I thought I'd have to do a test or something to validate this, because I don't feel like I'm a trainer. That to me does not make me a trainer. So what's your thoughts on that?
Do you know what, Peter? I always like controversy, so thanks for bringing that one up. It's we're a kind of the regional leads for MCTs are aware that people are coming on board with MCT where the prerequisites are kind of quite low. There's a loophole in it. So what Microsoft did at the beginning of the pandemic was say, look, we want to help our trainers, and one of the ways that we can do that is remove the cost of becoming certified as an MCT. So before that point, it was about £700-800, and you have to pay every single year in order to be able to do that. So by reducing that, there's a lot of people that cottoned on to the fact that if they had a Microsoft certification and they didn't have to pay and could get referenced from somebody else, for example, and they could go through and get the MCT. And I know 100% that there's some people who have done that for things like credential stuffing. So I think that we're all aware as kind of technicians and being in the community that certain people think that progression is when you can put everything on your resume and have all these letters after your name. But so everyone, we're aware that this is happening. Microsoft Worldwide Learning are aware that it's happening. So they are kind of reviewing that at this moment in time, both the cost and reintroducing that cost, but also as well setting the bar up in terms of MCT, because I think to do renewals, you have to deliver like one Microsoft course a year. Proper MCTs. So when I think of a proper MCT, I'm thinking of Ed Baker, or I'm thinking of Andrew Bettany, or I'm thinking of Sarah Fenner, or I'm thinking of Tiago Costa. When you think of those, of the people who, if you said the word MCT that you would think of, I mean, they're delivering all year long. They're delivering twice, 3 times a month. It ranges in the kind of the 30s or 40 courses a year that they're delivering. And so I think that Microsoft at some point are going to set the bar up for that. So it's not just going to be one. And I think they're considering other things as well. So, for example, I think that I heard that they're considering maybe doing a tier, for example, of kind of what level of MCT that you'll like. So they're exploring options. There's no confirmation of this, but they're exploring options. But I think when it kind of comes back to the end of the day, I think that you have to be honest with yourself about what it is that you're doing and be credentialed for what, kind of what it is that you're doing. I see lots of people online, I'm connected with, I think it's on LinkedIn, over 3,000 people. And I have a lot on Twitter too. And you see all the time they're coming up with their kind of their new exams that they're passing. Okay, and that's a fantastic thing. It's great that they're involved in that. But at the same time, you do notice people that try to go and get every cert going and try to get every credential going. And those things, whilst they're great, it's good to, for example, to use an analogy, it's great to kind of pass your driving lesson, kind of your driving test. That doesn't necessarily make you a good driver. So, and that's the same for, I think, it kind of how I feel about MCT as well. So MCT is really cool that it's grown. Are they actual MCTs as a proportion? Probably not. Those people, it's really that, I think, it's their responsibility to kind of recognize, and say, look, should I have done this? Am I an actual trainer or not? Because moving forward, it's not just about having the credential, it's proving that you can actually do it and you can back that up with evidence. And that's true whether you're a technician or whether you're a salesperson. And it's the same as a trainer as well. And at the end of the day, the people that do that and do that really well ultimately are recognized for it in the end. So that's kind of just my feeling on it.
That's important. Go on, Ruth.
Yeah, no, just probably the same thoughts as yourself, Peter. That's it's nice to know that there is this awareness of it, because we were interviewing recently Andy Malone, who's an MCT, been at it probably since before I've even been in IT. And I just want to kind of make sure that that MCT thing, it doesn't get devalued for guys like you know what I mean? So it's nice to know that Microsoft are aware that that is something that folks are maybe starting to talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, MCTs use metrics that matter in order to evaluate their courses. So
Right.
Microsoft are aware of the ones who actually teach regularly and who don't. So, you know, the metrics that matter, they've pinned people now into using metric. Before, you used to be able to get away with kind of doing some kind of your own forms and then submitting them as evidence, but you have to do metrics that matter now. So every time you kind of teach a course, so Microsoft are looking out for, they can see how regularly you teach, they can see what courses you're teaching. So I think that they're probably looking at that for a period of time in order to help them make a decision on what they're going to do going forward, for sure. Because, you know, when people, by description, the Microsoft certified trainer should be the subject matter expert for what they are teaching. They need to be right at the very top and have that deep understanding. So, you know, people that have just signed up thinking it's good to see MCT after their name and put it on their kind of social media, you know, and they're doing it in bad faith, that's going to reflect badly on them. Because let's say they go for a job interview or something later on and they say, look, we see you're an MCT in that area, and they start getting asked questions about that, and they sit there and they can't answer them.
Yeah.
Life has a tendency to do that, you know, it'll reflect back on that. So short-term gain, I don't think is going to help them people.
No, I think you're exactly right, because I went into it not knowing entirely what it was all about, surprised how easily I got it. And I'm not a trainer. I'm going to say that. And when mine runs out, I'm not going to renew it because I don't belong in that. Maybe in the future, it is something that I could be interested in, but I was misinformed and didn't get into it for the right reasons. So I get where you're coming from, and it's good to hear that Microsoft are aware of these things and looking to get a hold of it for sure. So that's good.
Absolutely. So, conscious of time, let's start wrapping this up. I do have one, kind of two important questions to ask you. The first of all is, where do you find the time to do everything? Because every time I go on Twitter and LinkedIn, you're sharing all this great stuff and things like that. So we kind of mentioned earlier how work trickles into hobbies. Is it just a case of that really is the case for you? It's just, I'm a Teams guy and I'm going to put all that stuff out there.
It's kind of weird. You know, when I think about this question, I always find it hard to articulate an answer on it. You know,
right.
I think for me, I like doing the community work. I like sharing it with people. I think that, and to kind of link this into the point about being an MCT, what I'm really passionate about is trying to make things easy for people and getting them up to speed so that they're not left behind on things. One of the kind of heroes of mine is, funny enough, is Brian Cox, because what I love about him is that he takes complicated things and tries to make them as simple as possible for people in order to be able to understand. And I'm very passionate. When I first came into IT, I think you guys probably know how it was back in the day. All of the kind of information on how to do things was completely hoarded, and there were people that were getting by, you know, by withholding information and siloing it for others. And
yes,
when in conversations, they would try to talk in the most complicated way because they wanted to kind of show what it is that they know. And they would exclude people in order to be able to do that. So I had a lot of that very early on in my career of people kind of, they hold it over you. It's a power thing, right? But so I was adamant that as I kind of got up the kind of the levels and I was in a position of influence, I would just try to make it as easy as possible and include as many people as possible in what it is that I do. So, you know, my passion is making things easy for people. That's why I call my blog series Teams Real Simple, because I'm honestly of the opinion that any single person can do that technology, even the technical stuff given time. In terms of where I get the time in order to be able to do it, it's something I've had to learn over the kind of past few years. I've had to try and automate stuff that I do. I've had to chain stuff together. I do a blog, it leads into social. I'll take that blog and I'll do it at an event. You learn how to kind of hit all the different areas at once. Sometimes, probably like yourselves, we have periods of real kind of tight periods of working. So I have to, I guess, to use an IT term, we have to burst. So we have to kind of, over the kind of couple of days, you're doing those 12, 14-hour days and stuff, and then it'll go back down to normal. So, yeah, sometimes it's a mystery. My only guiding principle is I do the stuff that I do was trying to be a good husband and father, and trying to be present. If that starts becoming kind of compromised, then I usually kind of try to scale back a little bit.
Awesome. No, those are great words to hear. You know what I mean? That's really good stuff. And I guess I have to wrap up the show because I do have a meeting to get to. I'm in the middle of a podcast, but that can wait. But I have to ask the obligatory question that we ask every guest, and I'm not sure if you're prepared for this one, but here it goes. So we ask every guest, what's your favorite Terminator? Terminator 1 or Terminator 2?
For me, it's got to be Terminator 2. It was the first one.
Yeah.
For it, I mean, the big James Cameron production kind of qualities of it. You think about the effects. I mean, like when his arm goes into a sword. Like when I first saw that when I was and to be honest with you, I don't think anyone was like 18 or something when I watched it. I watched it when I was probably about 9 or 10 or something. I was looking at this and I was thinking, this is absolutely unbelievable. Now it probably looks like kind of a bit gaudy, but no, it was honestly, and I think everyone shared a tear at the eye in the end where he had his thumbs up going to a lava pool. So it was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I've got to move on that actually. We didn't ask Jimmy that in the last episode because we were so excited to talk about WWE with him.
Yeah, take 2 next time.
Yeah.
Anyway, very, very great to meet you, Chris. This was a great show. Thanks for sharing all your wisdom about teams and especially the stuff about MCT and that whole work-life balance stuff. That's really interesting to hear. I guess I'll wrap up my piece. Thanks for joining us. Where can folks find you online so we can put all that in the show notes?
Yeah, cool. So you can find me on my website, Microsoft365pro.co.uk. I use Twitter. I use LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me at the tech community as well. So like Peter and Adam and the guys, we're all on there. You can also reach out to me if you ever want my corporate address, chris.hoard@fusion.cloud. I think that's probably all. I'm not into Insta or anything like that kind of yet.
You don't have a TikTok that folk can't find you?
Adam loves TikTok. He's kind of always on there. He's like, we should do TikTok videos and stuff. And I don't know whether it's a bridge too far. So I'm trying to keep it to certain spaces at this moment.
Well, if Microsoft bought it like they were rumored to do at one point, then it would be a different story, I guess.
Hey, we'll all be using it. If Microsoft, Microsoft TikTok, it'll be the new big thing.
Yep.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We are filming this on a Friday during our lunch hour, so appreciate all our time is valuable, so that is much appreciated. We will see you again very soon. Keep up the amazing work. Congratulations on all your success with Teams Nation and everything else that you do. And this has been episode 17 of Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete and our wonderful guest, Chris Hoard. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you down the road. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.